The following is a special production of the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Welcome to Tough Enough, a recap and breakdown show from the MMA Outsiders following every episode of The Ultimate Fighter Season 31, Team McGregor versus Team Chandler. And now, here are your hosts, Tom Albano and Zan Bando.
All right, another week of Tough in the books. 9 episodes down, 3 to go. We're one semifinal done. We got one spot in the finale locked up. Congratulations to the one and only Austin Hubbard, who moves on now to compete for the lightweight tough crown. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Albano. Welcome to another edition of Tough Enough, the Ultimate Fighter Team McGregor versus Team Chandler finale. We're going to have a lot to break down tonight to talk about everything that happened on this show. The fight itself, a little lackluster. Pretty lackluster if you ask UFC President Dana White, who was not impressed, as was Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor also was not impressed with the way everything played out here on episode 9 of The Ultimate Fighter. Obviously, Conor McGregor doesn't have the lion's share of the competitors in the semifinals, but he did gain somebody this week. That is important to note. Before we get into anything, again, this is Tough Enough, The Ultimate Fighter, Team McGregor versus Team Chandler finale. Team Chandler Aftermath, a special live stream series, limited series from the MMA Outsiders here on the Empty the Bench Network. Obviously, our finale is approaching very quickly. August 15th, I believe, is the final episode of TUF. And then the TUF finals are going to take place that Saturday night, August 19th. Was it 19? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Yeah, it would be August 19th. UFC 292 in Boston, I believe, during the preliminary card. Before we get into anything, make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Sorry, one sec. I forgot one other headline I wanted to put up on today's show, so I needed to make sure I have that there. All right. So make sure you hit like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here in the Empty the Bench Network. Every edition of Tough Enough, every episode of the MMA Outsiders. Of course, we have 2 parts of episode 47. Part 1 went up this morning on the YouTube channel and our audio-only platforms. Part 2 will be tomorrow. I'm going to be joined by Dylan Rush of Cage Side Press, and we're going to talk about his story with Bellator and the potential fate of that promotion. We'll also talk about some UFC headlines about certain championship fights that were just announced, one championship that's vacated. Those who don't know me, I am Tom Albano. You can find my work over at Fansided MMA, and you can follow me on social media, including the new X platform at Thomas J. Albano. Yes, I put quotes around that. Okay, sorry about that little pause. I just had a little technical difficulty for some reason. Everything on my screen just decided to freeze up. All right. So you can find my work over at Fansided MMA as well as with the Professional Fighters League. I'll be doing web results for them for the rest of the 2023 season, including the playoffs, which begin next month. Again, follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. And again, because this is a live stream, we are on our home on YouTube, 420 subscribers. So make sure to hit the subscribe button so we can reach that 500 subscriber milestone. Also live on our Facebook and Twitter feeds at MMA Outsiders ETB and at ETB Network. And of course at ETB Sports, the other show I'm a part of, Empty the Bench, broadcasting on their platforms as well. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about the episode before we get into the fight. So we kind of were given the teaser at the end of last week's show that the semifinalists that were on Team Chandler, because remember, Team Chandler had the 7-1 near sweep of Team McGregor. If it wasn't for the fact that Rico DeSulo ended up getting the huge knockout last week, Team McGregor would have been swept. They would have had to make some changes. I mean, some more changes, but ultimately, the semifinalists were given the choice if they wanted to switch to Team McGregor or not, because they walked into the house. They had the big board that listed the semifinal matchups. We were given the semifinal matchups. I will go through them in just a second. But some guys were listed on the Team McGregor side. And basically, they thought, that they were being forced over, like a little force switch. That was not true. The fights are going to be. Okay, there we go. So I was playing a little clip there from the show. So the lightweight semifinals, it's Kurt Hollabaugh and Jason Knight. And of course, tonight's Austin Hubbard versus Roosevelt Roberts fight. And with the bantamweights, it is Rico DeSulo taking on Cody Gibson and Brad Katona taking on Timur Valiev. So as I teased last week, we got the tease last week in last week's next episode teaser that Jason Knight was going to basically quit if he was forced over to Team McGregor. Team McGregor ultimately just gets one person, and that's Brad Katona. And not a surprise. And I'm not going to sit here. I'm actually not going to sit here and rant and rage about Conor McGregor. And I'm not going to rant and rage about Brad Katona. I'm not going to call him a snake in the grass, a la what happened the last time Conor McGregor was on TUF. And he said that to Uriah Faber about TJ Dillashaw. I'm not going to do that because this is not a surprise. We talked about it. This was a storyline heading into the season that once Brad Katona was drafted to Team Chandler, is he really going to be on Team Chandler's side? And you heard the quote from him in the very first episode. The only side that Brad Katona was on, according to Brad Katona, was Brad Katona. And well, he ends up going over to Team McGregor. Now you can pump your chest and say Team Chandler all the way, and that's a big mistake, or praise it because you're Team McGregor. It's not a surprise. Brad Katona trains with Conor McGregor. Brad Katona trains at SBG Ireland. Of course he's going to make that switch. Of course, if you gave him that opportunity, he would go over. It's not a surprise. And it's not a matter of, wanting to rant and rage and call him a traitor or say Conor McGregor, typical Conor McGregor up to no good. No. Of course Brad Katona is going to go there. Keep in mind, we're in the semifinals. The team portion of this competition is, for the most part, over and done. It's over. Now it's the individuals. Now it's about who's going to get into that finale. Now it's about who's going to get that UFC contract. There's nothing to worry about other than the opponent in front of them. And in this case, Austin Hubbard and Roosevelt Roberts. And they both talked about it. Michael Chandler talked about it. They made good friends. They were good friends, outside of the cage. They developed a rapport. They were training partners. But all that had to be out the window. And for Brad Katona, you can say what you want about Team McGregor and the coaching over there. I have said plenty of negative things about it. And you heard plenty of negative things from the Team Chandler members about it. But Brad Katona, it's familiarity. He's had some experience at Team Chandler in an uncomfortable environment, and now he's going back home to see if that will give him a better opportunity. And will Conor McGregor, John Kavanagh would better help lead him to the finale. So we'll talk about that with Brad Katona later on. We'll talk about it with Brad Katona next week. He is fighting in next week's semifinal, the first bantamweight semifinal. Interesting to note, there was no coaching ultimately allowed for Hubbard and Roberts. Dana basically said early in the episode that it was ultimately going to be up to Chandler to decide. Hold on one sec. Sorry, guys. I have to take this. All right. So ultimately, basically, he said it's ultimately up to Chandler to decide how he was going to go about training them. because he was going to have to train both, but obviously he needed to come up with the most fair way to train them. And so he ultimately, worked a little bit with Hubbard, did a little bit with Roberts, tried to keep them, away from one another. Ultimately, when the fight was about to start, the ruling was that basically Hubbard and Roberts couldn't be coached. They couldn't have any sort of coaching because, Chandler and the team know Austin Hubbard's strengths and weaknesses, know Robert's strengths and weaknesses. So they're not going to play both sides. Instead, they're just going to play no side and they're going to sit back and just watch how the fight plays out. And ultimately, it was kind of a really unique experience getting to watch that fight with no coaching. It was just, maybe some basic commentary here and there from Conor McGregor. You get to hear the referee, warnings for the fingers, calling the timeout on the accidental low blow in the first round. But I kind of liked it. It was kind of unique. Obviously the UFC Apex, when events were first held there during the COVID pandemic, it was already a unique kind of experience, and we just had the commentators. But to have no commentary whatsoever was really, really unique. And ultimately, I really liked it. It really puts you in that judge's feel of watching the fight, analyzing the fight as if you were a judge with no crowd to basically sway you. And ultimately, that's the kind of experience that Zan and I have been talking about on the MMA Outsiders, that the judges for these commissions ultimately need. They need a place like some isolated, soundproof booth where they can watch the fights, not be swayed by a crowd, not have any sort of distractions that they could fall asleep or pay no attention to the fight to. It's perfect. But of course, the commissions are going to get in their own way, and because of this or because of that, we're not going to have that kind of experience. So the least I can do is maybe, and no disrespect to the UFC commentators. I love John Anik. I love Brendan Fitzgerald. Love John Gooden, Paul Felder, Daniel Cormier. I love them all. Just, I wish we had the opportunity to, at some point, turn the commentary off and just listen with the crowd noise. And I quote unquote, because, sometimes the crowd is there, be it in London or in Nashville, or sometimes we're just in the UFC Apex, which is there. I just gave you the UFC Apex experience. So I wish that option was allowed. Oh, and something to note, by the way, Roosevelt Roberts needed 2 attempts to make the weight. So Roosevelt Roberts, he came in, he weighed in 156 and a quarter. So he was given the old box of shame, and they said, oh, he'll make it. And he didn't. He was still 156 and a quarter. So he was given an additional hour to make the weight. And he ultimately decided, instead of going back in the sauna, he was going to cut his dreads, cut his hair. And ultimately that made the difference. And he was able to weigh in at 156. Fight was on. And also, so I mean, just a note, it wasn't it wasn't like it was in danger of the fight being canceled, but it was something to note. He screwed up his weight cut. And I wonder how that really played into the fight. If it did at all. Okay, fight itself. Bad. Bad. Not a great fight. Not a great fight at all. So, first round was kind of like a bit of a sparring matchup. Because, on one hand, you had... On one hand, I felt like Roosevelt Roberts did a good job of keeping his distance. I thought he landed more effective strikes, but Austin Hubbard had more activity. And yet that word activity is just, it's a real loose meaning of that word. Let's put it that way, because I think Conor said that, Dana said it, I think even Chandler hinted at it, and I kind of told it to Zan when I was messaging him before. Round 1 felt more like a sparring match. It just felt like two guys, two training partners, as they were, just in there, just trying to get a feel of one another. They just didn't get into the second gear. So that said, that basically the interpretation was that needed to change in the second round. Somebody needed to take control. And Austin Hubbard did take control. He did manage to score a takedown. And it pretty much, once he's got the takedown, he was in control throughout that second round. Was it a dominant display? I don't know if dominant is the right word because, I mean, it was a clear Austin Hubbard round, but he didn't do too much with it. And yet it was the most clear of those rounds. Roosevelt Robertson got a takedown in the third round because remember now, since it's the semifinals, all fights now go to 3 rounds. Your traditional 3 5-minute rounds like a UFC bout. Roberts got the takedown, but ultimately he didn't really do anything with it. And Hubbard eventually fought back, got in better control, and it was kind of split. It was kind of a very meh round, ultimately. And ultimately, Hubbard got the nod via split decision. I don't really have a problem with a split decision because ultimately that first round was a complete toss-up. Everyone said that first round was a toss-up, so you could have realistically given, round 2 was a clear Hubbard round. Round 1 you could have given to Roberts. Round 3, ultimately, I gave to Hubbard. I had a 29-28 for Hubbard. 29-28 to Roberts. I'm not going to be angry about it, but you know, you hate using Dana's words because sometimes Dana can be very overbearing. Sometimes Dana can be a bit of a loose cannon or the red hot fiery tomato. But he was kind of right when he says that this was not a good fight. And for two guys who have the UFC experience and were trying to get back into the good graces of that promotion, like Austin Hubbard and Roosevelt Roberts, and get back into the UFC. Ultimately, you didn't need that kind of performance. Now, credit where credit's due. Austin Hubbard did what he needed to do to win the fight. He did get the takedown. He did have better activity. I give him that. But Dana White has put the warning out of he really hopes they look better in the finale. So they're not doing a good service for themselves. However, I will say that, Austin Hubbard, I had my eye on him about when they were looking at the lightweight competitors the first time around. I think Austin Hubbard will perform better in the finale, and I think that Austin Hubbard will ultimately, there's a pretty good chance he'll get the win in the finale. But it all depends on who he's going to meet. But I think this should be Hubbard's. As far as next week's, do we move on to next week's bet? I thought I had one other point I wanted to make. If it comes back to me, it comes back to me. So let's just go over to next week's fight, the first bantamweight semifinal. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was I think Austin Hubbard is a really good all-around kind of competitor. So, and Michael Chandler, that's where I was going with. Michael Chandler basically said the one thing that he will do to defend Hubbard and Roberts is that first round. I mean, it's hard because Hubbard and Roberts have both trained with each other throughout the time that they've been in the TUF house. So they kind of know one another. So you do need that time period to get adjusted to your opponent. All right, now I'm ready to talk about the bantamweight semifinal that takes place next week. It's Brad Katona, as we mentioned, now part of Team McGregor. It's going to be very interesting to see how the different camp now affects him. Of course, he's not just trading from one camp to the other, from Team Chandler, Team McGregor. He has trained with McGregor before. It is his home base, I should say. Team McGregor, Conor McGregor, John Kavanagh, etc. So Brad Katona will go in there, and he'll be taking on Timur Valiev of Team Chandler, who is another person. I mean, these are two guys I had my eye on. Brad Katona as a veteran, and Timur Valiev as a prospect. And now these two are going to be facing off. So I think maybe Katona going over to Team McGregor. Like I said, I'm not surprised. And you know what? It's probably what makes him feel better. Probably what makes a lot of people feel better, to be really honest with you, because he had all that concern about whose side Bracketon is on. Uh, but that being said, I think Timur Valiev and his wrestling is just going to be a little too much. But I do find that interesting. It's Timur Valiev, who's known for his wrestling, Dagestani style of wrestling, and we know who Conor McGregor's greatest rival was, who has the Dagestani wrestling experience, and now Timur Valiev is going to be taking on somebody from McGregor's camp. And we get another twist next week. The guest on next week's show, who will be helping Timur Valiev in preparation for his fight, it's not who you think it is. It is not Khabib Nurmagomedov, but it is the protege of Khabib Nurmagomedov and the current UFC lightweight champion, Islam Makhachev. I think this is going to cause a little bit of bad blood, methinks. And methinks that next week's fight between Katona and Valiev should make up for this week's kind of snooze fest. And I will say this to end today's show. I am so high on Katona. And Katona, I should have also mentioned before, he did win TUF before. He won the Ultimate Fighter undefeated season with Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic. I think Katona has the ability to win this season again. And if not, Valiev has been one of my picks from the beginning. So I'm going to make the claim here. I think the winner of next week's Brad Katona Timur Valiev bout is going to be winning next month at UFC 292 and will be the TUF champion for a bantamweight. I think next week's, even though it's a semifinal, I don't think that really anybody who's still left in this tournament has the shot. It's Rico and Cody Gibson. Yeah, Rico and Cody just don't have a chance against either Katona or Valiev. Whoever wins this next week is next week's the finale. Next week's the finale for bantamweight. You know, and I will give all my support and love to DeSulo and Gibson, but I honestly feel that these two guys are the best of the remaining four at bantamweight. As far as lightweight goes, next week Kurt Hollabaugh, Jason Knight. I think that obviously that's not next week's bout. I'm just looking ahead because of Austin Hubbard winning tonight. And I think Austin Hubbard has a decent chance against both of them. I'm very curious if Kurt Hollabaugh's magic will continue through. Maybe it's a little biased on me because I've talked to Kurt Hollabaugh before. But yeah, basically, Bracketona Timur Valiev next week. That should be a lot of fun. And this has been fun. So thank you all for tuning in for another edition of Tough Enough. Again, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty Bench Network, every edition of Tough Enough, the MMA Outsiders, and so much more. If you're watching this on Facebook or Twitter, hit the like button, hit the retweet, or the share. Make sure to like the page or follow the page and give us, all the love and support in the world. 421 subscribers and counting and climbing all the way up to 500. We really appreciate you all out there. I'm Tom Albano. You can find my work over at Fansided MMA and with the Professional Fighters League for the PFL, for the rest of the PFL 2023 season, including the playoffs that start next month. Follow me on social media platforms at Thomas J. Albano, namely on X, aka FKA, Twitter, and then it'll be FKAX once this X name fails. But yeah, pretty much that's going to do it. Again, earlier today, we got to release episode 47, part 1. Yes, because of all the content we've got. We've got a whole lot of fighting coming this weekend with UFC 291, Spence Crawford, the Bellator Rising card, and so much more, that we decided to split episode 47 into 2 parts. I was joined by Zan this week to go over those cards and preview those cards, as well as talk about the big story that was broken by Dylan Rush of Cage Side Press about the potential fate of Bellator MMA and a Bellator 300 card. So we did that. And tomorrow on part 2, I will be joined by Dylan, and we will go over his story and talk about some other news elements that have been going around, news headlines that have been going around in the MMA sphere. So tune in tomorrow morning for part 2. Again, I'm Tom Albano. Thank you again for joining me for another edition of Tough Enough. Thank you for tuning in to MMA Outsiders and the Empty the Bench Network. And we will see you guys next week for episode 10, getting one step closer to the finale. But until then, enjoy the fights this weekend. Peace out, everybody. See you next time.